Was Shakespeare Shakespeare? Questions regarding the genuine authorship of Shakespeare became popular long after he died. There are countless suggestions that the plays were covertly written by another hand. Currently, the popular candidates are Edward de Vere, who's the 17th Earl of Oxford, and Sir Francis Bacon. Previous speculations have included Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, Mary Sidney, the Earl of Derby, the Earl of Rutland, and at least 43 other candidates. What is sad is that if you mention Shakespeare in almost any social circle, the conversation will very quickly move to questions of authorship instead of discussions about the greatness of the work or the actual content of the plays. Some non-Stratfordians who claim to know the identity of another who really wrote the plays sometimes consider themselves wiser than those who accept on face value that Shakespeare was indeed the author. And some Stratfordians who believe that Shakespeare was indeed the author respond by calling non-Stratfordians conspiracy theorists or deniers. Their vehemence sometimes suggests an unhealthy allegiance to orthodoxy, received opinion, and official versions. I believe that a healthy skepticism, alloyed to an open mind, form the best tools for approaching reality. It is always best to check the evidence. Consequently, I neither accept on face value who wrote these plays, nor do I subscribe unthinkingly to an orthodoxy or tradition. Whilst I do fall on the side of Shakespeare being Shakespeare, I have reached my opinion by weighing the evidence. In the final analysis, I think the evidence is overwhelming. Evidence which places Shakespeare as living in the Stratford region, a countryman, and as the author of these fine plays. When taken together, the examples offered in the following pages form an argument which persuades me that Shakespeare was indeed the man from Stratford. Behind many arguments against Shakespeare's authorship lies a sense of incredulity that a relatively ordinary man in some respects from Stratford could have written all of these magnificent plays. They cite his prosaic beginnings and declare that an exceptional playwright could not be forged from such material. But this would suggest that genius can always be explained, that it can be traced in a linear fashion, and that its ingredients are known, and in the case of Shakespeare are somehow lacking. Nothing could be further from the truth. If it were true, then 4 average lads born in Liverpool during the Second World War with no musical training, indeed who never learned to read music, would never become a musical group who would revolutionise popular songwriting. I'm talking, of course, of the Beatles. They wrote a vast compendium of music which set musicians alight for decades. Critics have commented on their music's sophistication, often using terms and nomenclature which remain incomprehensible to the composers themselves, e.g. the Aeolian cadences described by William Mann of the Times. Others note with fascination and admiration songs which have 7 key changes without you even noticing. So said Howard Goodall on Penny Lane. The argument that Shakespeare's humble beginnings place him outside the possibility of authorship is so prevalent that I would like to cite 2 further examples to dispel the efficacy of any such arguments. One is of the African American with Cherokee origins, born into abject poverty in America in 1942. His father was away in the army for nearly the whole of his first 3 years, and absent out of choice pretty much after that too. His parents divorced when he was 9 years old, and he left school with nothing. His alcoholic mother died of cirrhosis of the liver when he was 15. His teenage years were troubled, and petty crime nearly put him in prison for riding stolen cars. He had the choice of going to jail for 2 years or joining the army. He joined the 101st Airborne Division, but was a hopeless soldier, and a year later was discharged. He became interested in the guitar, but never read a note of music in his entire life. When he did get a recording contract with his own band, he spent just 4 years recording 4 albums, 3 studio and 1 live, before he died at the age of 27. Some might think that his humble beginnings and lack of musical training would produce nothing of worth, but they would be wrong. His name was Jimi Hendrix, and many regard him as the best electric guitarist the world has seen, a musical virtuoso. Then there's the boy who didn't speak fluently until he was 12, whom the family maid referred to as the Dopey One. He hated school and was often in trouble. He called his schools barracks, and he referred to the teachers as lieutenants. Soon after, he failed his entrance exam to college, only to be accepted later. Then he was expelled. He was told by his teachers that he would amount to nothing. When he was 22, his girlfriend became pregnant, and he was unemployed. He became a teacher, but was so unsuccessful that he had to recruit some of his family to make up the numbers. He worked a menial job in a patent office. And even when he was famous much later, he moved to America and was viewed by the authorities as something of a reprobate. The FBI, suspicious of his socialist tendencies, made a file on him, collecting 18,000 pages of derogatory information. They tapped his phone, opened his mail, and went through his trash. Today he is regarded as one of the most brilliant thinkers the world has ever seen. He is certainly the foremost thinker of the 20th century. Indeed, his name is synonymous with brilliant intellect. He is, of course, Einstein. He gave us the special and general theories of relativity, achievements as significant as those of Isaac Newton. Genius can neither be traced nor explained. Furthermore, so much of Shakespeare's greatness rests on his profound facility for metaphor and apt imagery, on the enormous scope of his poetic imagination. Such talents are not likely to be learned or improved in schools or universities. Indeed, if they were on the curriculum, such lessons might hinder any genuine poet with their innate talent. Ironically, many of these too humble beginnings arguments have their origins in a parody which backfired. In 1848, a devout follower of Christ, Samuel Mosheim Schmucker, was irritated by David Friedrich Strauss's book, The Life of Jesus, which doubted most of the facts of Christ's life. Strauss's book claimed that there had been, quote, no incarnation, no supernatural divine Christ, no miracles, and no resurrection of the dead. Schmucker wanted to ridicule Strauss's position by applying the same level of uncertainty to a person whom everyone knew was who he said he was, Shakespeare. Schmucker thought Shakespeare's case so watertight that he could parody away and thus challenge the arguments of Strauss. He used Shakespeare because he thought Shakespeare's authorship was obviously beyond question. In his book, Historical Doubts Respecting Shakespeare, illustrating infidel objections against the Bible, Schmucker sought to show the flaws in Strauss's approach by showing how they could be used to disprove people whom everyone knew to be genuine. His parody contained passages like this: "Is it not strange that one individual so ill-prepared by previous education and other indispensable requisites should be the sole author of so many works, in all of which it is pretended that such extraordinary merit and rare excellence exist?" Such was the persuasiveness of his parody that people took it on face value and questioned Shakespeare's authenticity rather than Strauss's arguments against Christ. It's worth noting that a similar parody could be made of the Beatles' talent. Isn't it strange that 4 people poorly educated and with no musical training whatsoever should be credited with writing so many beautiful and varied songs, and be not just purveyors of their craft, but world leaders also? Is this what we are to believe? Schmucker's book was the catalyst for some of the earliest doubts concerning Shakespeare. People took his humorous debunking of Strauss instead as a serious challenge to Shakespeare's claim of authorship. Theories that Shakespeare could not possibly have written these glorious plays rest on a kind of elitism. It boils down to people insisting that Shakespeare should have followed their prescribed path towards greatness, as if they knew the recipe. The implication is that anyone not following the correct way to genius ought to be stripped of their authorship. In the academic world, sneering is often disguised as scholarship. In a bid to maintain this prejudice, certain scholars sometimes try to suggest that Shakespeare's beginnings were so humble and his education so meagre that nothing grand could possibly emerge from it. Indeed, a portrait is painted by some of a country simpleton with limited access to books, attending a backwater village school, reading little, and who married an illiterate wife and raised illiterate children, that he had illiterate simple-minded parents, etc. Such extreme caricature has no basis in fact. Others suggest that only a city aristocrat or nobleman could have written these dazzling plays, not some backwater country yokel. Shakespeare was almost certainly educated at Stratford's grammar school. He was, after all, the son of a man who became the bailiff. In this school, boys were taught Latin as a second language, using William Lilly's Latin grammar, which they would learn to speak, write and read in. He would also have been taught rhetoric, oratory and classical literature, including Ovid's Metamorphoses. The school day was from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m, 6 days a week and no holidays except holy days, and Shakespeare would have attended from the age of 7. School children used a Latin-English dictionary which was donated by the vicar who baptised Shakespeare. Another 168 books were given to the school by a curate from a nearby village, so there were plenty of books to study and read. Evidence of Shakespeare's schooling crops up in his plays. In Much Ado About Nothing, Benedict says, "How now, interjections? Why then some be of laughing, as are, ha, he." Act 4, Scene 1, which comes directly from a section in William Lilly's Latin Grammar, published in 1549. He refers to Lilly's book again in Titus Andronicus, Act 4, Scene 2, and he directly quotes from it in Henry IV, Part 1, "Homo is a common name to all men," Act 2, Scene 1. He also alludes to it in The Merry Wives of Windsor, Act 4, Scene 1. As to Shakespeare's children being illiterate, in the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust are kept the actual signatures of both of Shakespeare's daughters, Susanna and Judith. Susanna's gravestone records her as being intelligent and witty and like Shakespeare himself. Is it likely anyone would make such comments about an illiterate simpleton? In full it reads, "Here lieth the body of Susanna, wife of John Hall, gent, the daughter of William Shakespeare, gent. She deceased the 11th day of July, anno 1649, age 66. Witty above her sex, but that's not all. Wise to salvation was good Mistress Hall. Something of Shakespeare was in that, but this, wholly of him whom she's now in bliss. Then passenger hast ne'er a tear to weep with her that wept withal, that wept yet set herself to cheer them up with comforts cordial. Her love shall live, her mercy spread, when thou hast ne'er a tear to shed." The grave of Susanna Shakespeare, Church of the Holy Trinity, Stratford-upon-Avon. Some say Shakespeare's parents might not have been able to sign their own names and were therefore illiterate. It is then argued that such parents could not raise a Shakespeare. But even if his parents could not sign their names, is that necessarily a measure of their intelligence? In 16th century English schools, reading and writing were often taught separately. Handwriting skills are not a measure of intelligence, imagination or creativity in parents or their offspring, who may be educated differently. Furthermore, the attainment of someone's parents is no sure indicator of their child's potential. Some say Shakespeare's handwriting was poor, but so is that of many doctors, and they are not regarded as illiterate. The idea of Shakespeare's parents lacking intelligence simply does not fit what we know of them. Shakespeare's father was a glover and a whittower, that's a leather worker, a dealer of wool and hides, and was elected to several municipal offices, serving as an alderman, eventually to become a bailiff, the chief magistrate of the town. Mary, Shakespeare's mother, was the named executor of her father's will. Such roles suggest two people with a certain measure of intelligence, maturity, and responsibility, hardly the roles for backward simpletons. Others argue that Shakespeare's understanding of court life suggests that the author of these plays must have been a civic, worldly wise man of the city, not a country boy from Stratford. Caroline Spurgeon, in her 1935 book, Shakespeare's Imagery, has pointed out that the texts are bursting with images and metaphors which reveal a countryman's perspective far more than a city gent's or aristocrat's. There are kites, hunting, fields, falcons, farmers' dogs, farmers, etc. Indeed, A.C. Bradley has noted that in King Lear alone, Shakespeare references the dog, the horse, the cow, the sheep, the hog, the lion, the bear, the wolf, the fox, the polecat, the civet cat, the pelican, the owl, the crow, the chough, the wren, the fly, the butterfly, the rat, the mouse, the frog, the tadpole, the wall-newt, the water-newt, the worm, etc. In total, there are 133 references to some 64 different animals. They resonate as metaphors because their intrinsic nature is fully realized and understood. These are not mere nouns. These are living concepts which a writer connects with, relates to, inhabits even. Shakespeare writes about country activities, places, things and occupations which are understood and whose intricacies are known. Other clues place the writer of these fine plays as not just a countryman, but specifically a man of Warwick and Stratford in particular. Dialect words like geck, meaning fool, and wapad, meaning tired, are from the very specific region of Warwickshire and the West Midlands. And to become the geck and scorn are the other's villainy, Cymbeline, Act 5, Scene 4. And made the most notorious geck and gull that e'er invention played on. Tell me why. Twelfth Night, Act 5, Scene 1. This it is that makes the wapad widow wed again. Timon of Athens, Act 4, Scene 3. We come towards the gods, young and unwapad, not halting under crimes. Two noble kinsmen, Act 5, Scene 4. Then there are details of people and places that perhaps only a man from the Stratford region would know. In The Taming of the Shrew, a character called Sly says, "Ask Marian Hackett, the fat alewife of Wincot." From Induction, Scene 2. Wincot is a village 3 miles north of Stratford. Shakespeare's mother was born there around 1540, about a decade before The Taming of the Shrew was written. The minutes of the Stratford Corporation, 11th of November 1584, mention the tithes of Wincot, which is the very spelling of the village that appears in the folio text of The Taming of the Shrew. Today the town is known as Wilmcott. The name Marian Hackett adds further weight to Shakespeare being a Stratfordian, in that the town records show that the Hackett family lived in Wincot in the 1590s, the very time that the play was written. Also in The Taming of the Shrew, Induction Scene 2, we have the mention of the place of Burton Heath, now known as Barton on the Heath, where Shakespeare's uncle and aunt lived. In Henry IV, Part 2, a character called Silence refers to Falstaff as Goodman Puff of Barson, Act 5, Scene 1. Barson village in Warwickshire was 14 miles south of Stratford-upon-Avon. Whoever wrote these plays was personally acquainted with country life, knew the slang and dialect peculiar to a very specific area around Stratford, and even knew people who lived in minor neighbouring villages. The writer of these plays also had inside knowledge of the glove-making trade, which happened to be one of the skills Shakespeare's father once earned a living from. In Twelfth Night, the clown Fester uses a very precise metaphor relating to gloves and glove-making. A sentence is but a cheverel glove to a good wit. How quickly the wrong side may be turned outward. Act 3, Scene 1. Cheverel is the soft kidskin used in glove-making, which was Shakespeare's father's trade. His father was also in the wool trade, and in Henry IV, Part 2, the character Davy mentions two actual wool traders from the Cotswolds. I beseech you, sir, to countenance William Visor of Woncott against Clement Perks of the Hill. In his lifetime and thereafter, other writers identified Shakespeare from Stratford as the writer of these plays. In a pamphlet published in 1592, Robert Greene, a rival playwright, warns other playwrights. There is an upstart crow beautified with our feathers, that with his tiger's heart, wrapped in a player's hide, supposes he is as well able to bombast out a blank verse as the best of you, and being an absolute Johannes factotum, is in his own conceit the only shake seen in a country. The opening line of this attack is an obvious parody of a line from Henry VI, Part 3, Act 1, Scene 4, wherein York has the line, "O tiger's heart wrapped in a woman's hide." Given that this particular play was first performed in either 1590 or 1591, the timing of the pamphlet, 1592, is perfect as a response. The upstart crow in borrowed plumage is of course a reference to Aesop's crow, who did the same. The reference to a player alludes to Shakespeare's profession as an actor. The closing line of the attack puns on Shakespeare's name. Thus Shakespeare has been linked to one of his plays directly, and has been identified with the theatre as a playwright, evidently as someone to look out for, a rival or threat even. In 1598, a minister, Francis Mears, published a book, Palladis Tamia, subtitled Wit's Treasury. The book is a compendium of literature celebrating many great works. Shakespeare's name occurs more than any other, and he is the only playwright whose work is featured. In the comparative discourse section of the book, he lists no less than 12 plays by Shakespeare, identifying him as the author. The plays he mentions are Two Gentlemen of Verona, Comedy of Errors, Love's Labour's Lost, Love Labour's Won, Midsummer Night's Dream, Merchant of Venice, Richard II, Richard III, Henry IV, King John, Titus Andronicus, and Romeo and Juliet. This book also establishes the above plays as being composed on or before 1598, which is congruent with Shakespeare of Stratford upon Avon. Francis Mears saved particular praise for Venus and Adonis, the Rape of Lucrece, and the sonnets, which he called mellifluous and honey-tongued. He compared Shakespeare to Ovid, and obviously regarded him as one of the best English playwrights. Also in 1598, the poet Richard Barnfield from Norbury, Staffordshire, published an appendix to a book entitled Poems in Diverse Humours. In it he praises Shakespeare for Venus and Adonis. In 1599, John Weaver from Preston, Lancashire, published Epigrams, which contained the following sonnet. Honey-tongued Shakespeare, when I saw thine issue, I swore Apollo got them and none other. Their rosy tainted features clothed in tissue, some heaven-born goddess said to be their mother. Rose-cheeked Adonis with his amber tresses, fair fire-hot Venus charming him to love her. Chaste Lucretia, virgin-like her dresses, proud lust-stung Tarquin, seeking still to prove her. Romeo, Richard, more whose names I know not. Their sugared tongues and power, attractive beauty, say they are saints, although that saints they show not, for thousands vow to them subjective duty. They burn in love, thy children Shakespeare het them. Go, woe thy muse, more nymphish brood beget them. His first 3 lines are probably borrowed from Francis Mere's previous tribute. The sonnet clearly identifies Shakespeare as the writer of Venus and Adonis, Romeo and Richard, praising him for the power of his words. Incidentally, Shakespeare's Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece were not written for the theatre. Some believe that Shakespeare wrote these 2 long narrative poems when theatres were closed. Gabriel Harvey, a poet and critic at the time of Shakespeare, wrote a long note in the margin of his copy of the 1598 edition of the works of Chaucer. In it he says, "The younger poet takes much delight in Shakespeare's Venus and Adonis, but his Lucrece and his tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, have it in them to please the wiser poet." Not only does he identify Shakespeare as the author of 3 of his works, but also he refers to Hamlet, which would have been Shakespeare's newest play. In addition, he mentions the Earl of Essex, who was executed in February 1601, so the dating here is very accurate. The book of Chaucer's The Works, with Harvey's handwritten notes, is kept in the British Library. Part of it can be seen here, with the reference to Shakespeare and his works on the line bisected by the bottom point of the decorative diamond. John Davis of Hereford, a writing teacher and Anglo-Welsh poet, in his 1611 piece The Scourge of Folly, referred to Shakespeare as our English Terence, after the famous Roman playwright. In total, no less than 14 of Shakespeare's contemporaries have written about him, each discussing his poems and plays, and each identifying him as the author of them. One of the most telling pieces of evidence that Shakespeare is indeed Shakespeare is that the voice of Shakespeare in his poems and plays is unique. It is not at all like that of Ben Jonson, Christopher Marlowe, Francis Bacon, or even the recent hot favourite Edward de Vere, who died in 1604 before Macbeth, King Lear, Timon of Athens, Antony and Cleopatra, and at least 4 other Shakespeare plays were written. From the canon, we can tell Shakespeare's personality is one of someone who finds interest and meaning in an incredibly wide range of topics and situations. Someone who appears comfortable with all walks of life. He speaks with great compassion of beggars and kings. In King Lear, the king raises questions about who is guiltier, the defendant or the judiciary. He also regards authority as nothing more than a farmer's dog barking at a beggar. There is a complete absence of anything like an aristocratic attitude. He is passionate about justice, but he is neither judgmental nor condescending. Where other playwrights might exude cleverness, Shakespeare reveals a deep wisdom about nature, people, parenthood, politics, and society. There is a warmth and humanity in the writing. There is also a rare combination of total command over the language and an endless facility for playfulness, metaphor, and ambiguity, which in my opinion has never been equalled. Some point to the fact that in Shakespeare's will he left no books as evidence that he wasn't the author of these plays. However, the full list, the inventory of the testator's household effects, was held by his son-in-law John Hall, who married Susanna in 1607. It was this that was presented to the Archbishop of Canterbury on the 22nd of June 1616 to prove Shakespeare's will. It was customary for books, documents and letters to be on such lists rather than in the will itself. Some have argued that the plays reference geographic locations, e.g. Venice, Milan, Verona, which Shakespeare could not have visited, and therefore the plays must have been written by someone else. The logic of this hardly needs challenging. It should come as no great surprise to anyone that writers use their imaginations. Arthur C. Clarke wrote about the moon. Philip K. Dick wrote about workers on Mars. Charles Dickens wrote about a clerk working for an establishment known as Scrooge and Marley. When authors write about any place, they often only need a rough semblance of geography for their purposes. Detail becomes necessary if the story requires it. Many specifics can be gleaned from a wide variety of sources, other travellers, books, plays, paintings, etc. Geography in Shakespeare is always a mere backdrop to the more interesting interactions between people. Furthermore, playwrights sometimes use artistic license in altering a few details of a place if it suits their story better. And who knows, during the 7 years in which we have no records concerning Shakespeare's life, 1585 to 1592, he may have travelled to some of the places he used as settings for some of his plays. If he didn't, I still see no problem. He can still set a play in Venice if he so wishes. Geographical accuracy is not the focus in Shakespeare's plays. Their truth is emotional, interpersonal, philosophical, psychological, spiritual, some would say. Their subject is humanity, consciousness, awareness, and wisdom. Fiction is not biography, nor does the journey of an author's life prescribe the bounds of all possible subject matter. Imagination, empathy, and creativity are all at the writer's disposal. The assumption that all writing is somehow autobiography is also the great failing of much commentary on Shakespeare's sonnets. Many make the mistake of interpreting each as a personal love letter to some specific person in Shakespeare's life. To conclude, I would suggest that Shakespeare truly was the countryman from Stratford. The evidence here, taken as a collective, is persuasive. To me, at least. The real conspiracy is perhaps the one which suggests that a mere country boy from Stratford would never be able to achieve all that he has achieved, and that only aristocrats and those with more privilege and education could have written to such a high standard. Such a view might have more to do with class than the classics. Thank you for watching. This short film presents a chapter from my book, What Happens in Shakespeare's King Lear, a 500-page guide to Shakespeare's great tragedy, which provides a walk-through commentary on every scene and an at-hand glossary right next to difficult or arcane words, so there's no more bouncing up and down to the foot of the page, or even worse, to the back of the book. Everything has been designed to give you the richest possible experience of reading Shakespeare. It is available free delivery to anywhere in the world via the book depository. See link in text below. Or if you prefer, Amazon offer free postage with this item to most countries. See link in text below. Thank you for watching. I hope you found the film interesting and entertaining.